Hi, welcome to Can't Shelve This, the podcast where we hammer home the importance of school libraries. I'm Janette and I'm joined by my co-host Leah Gregory.
Hi, everyone.
And our producer Ola Gronsky.
Hello, everybody.
So how's everyone doing?
I'm here. It's been one of those weeks.
I feel like that's kind of like the theme for 2026 is I'm here. And that's all I can say about it.
I'm here and I'm putting one foot in front of the other. Yes.
Okay, so have you been watching anything good lately? Any new shows? Anything you're into?
You just need to talk about Heated Rivalry.
I'm not going to talk about Heated Rivalry, but that is kind of in the same vein of what I'm going to ask her because the reason I was having a conversation with some people in one of my group chats on Instagram because it's a group chat of readers, primarily romance readers, but there were a couple people in there who were discussing Heated Rivalry and how protective they feel coming at it as having read it when we did. And like, we've known these books, we've known these characters, we've known these stories for a long time. And now watching other people come to that and have like a completely different experience with the fandom. It's a different time. Like I'm telling you, I read this story in 2019, like the world was different in 2019 than it is in 2026. Was. Right. So how do you feel when something that you know that's maybe lesser known and that you've been a fan of goes mainstream like that?
I'm usually happy that people are discovering it because if I truly love it, then I want that for the creator.
Yeah, true.
You know what I mean? But I'm also like slightly precious and pretentious about it. Like, well, I've been a fan of that for a very long time, you know? So.
Right. The original hipster mentality.
Yes.
I knew the band before it was cool.
Yes.
That is exactly it. And that's what I was trying to explain that to someone in this chat. I was like, just because I discovered it when I did doesn't mean someone else's discovery is less valid, I guess. But you do feel differently about it. Like, it's almost, you kind of have to get past that feeling of like, well, like, where were you? Like, why did it take you so long?
You've been sleeping on this. Yeah.
Right. But but the age range of people in this group chat is like 18 to like 75.
So where were you at? I was in grade school. Thank you for asking.
Like, you were not reading the Game Changers series by Rachel Reed when you were in grade school. So like sometimes you don't have the opportunity. So like I try to also remember that. Like people were just at different places.
I like it when something like when the Kate Bush song from Stranger Things went viral because I love that song in the 80s and I'm just like, oh, that is amazing. And now it's happening again for Prince because of the latest episodes. So I love that because it was great. The 80s were great.
It kind of makes you still feel like you're current, even though you're not.
Yes.
For me, with like book to movie or book to show adaptations, I try really hard to separate them. I'm like, all right, it's its own little piece of art. It's its own little interpretation. Like I just watched People We Meet on Vacation. I know Leah and I are both big Emily Henry fans. Yeah. Yep. And I was seeing a lot of polarizing views online. I was seeing people say like, I can't believe you cut out this scene. I can't believe you cut out this. But then there were other people being like, oh my God, I love it so much. Alex and Poppy. And I will say my takeaway is, was the book better? Of course. Because the book like builds the yearning. You just get so much more information. It feels truly like you spend more time with the characters almost. So you have this like fondness for them in your heart. And then the movie for me was just fun. It was so fun. It still gave me the Emily Henry feeling of like, oh my God, I want to like kick my feet in the air. This is so darn cute. Like,
yes,
really cute. I thought it was well done. Like I said, I think I'm pretty good at like separating it in my head. I'm like, that's the movie Alex and Poppy, and then there's the book Alex and Poppy.
Do you think it depends on the fandom? Like, are some fandoms more willing to do that than others?
Probably. I was going to say that, but when it comes to music, I get very upset when my quote unquote obscure bands blow up. Mostly because then it's harder to get concert tickets and things like that. Yeah. Like Dermot Kennedy is one of my favorites. And then this past fall, I tried to get concert tickets. I was in the pre-sale line. I was waiting. I was in the waiting room. 1 minute, sold out. Didn't make it. I was like number 50 something and I didn't make it. And I was devastated because I was like, I've been a fan for years.
And you almost want to be like, I registered for your fan club in 2018. Like,
Yeah.
this
Seniority.
should count. Like, I should have a status here.
Oh, I'm so protective over Damiano David from Måneskin.
Yeah.
I was like, I discovered him on Eurovision years ago.
Yeah.
And I deserve points for that as a fan. Like, the inner fangirl comes out. It's hard. It's different.
It's hard to kind of like let people in. Like, I don't remember ever feeling proprietary about things like the Hunger Games or Twilight or Harry Potter or any of that kind of stuff.
I think because those blew up so fast.
So, like, I think what's happening or has happened with Heated Rivalry is interesting because it was really only known to people who were fans of the books, because that book series wasn't even very well known until it got made into this streaming series, at least in my opinion. But I think what I start to object to a little bit when you have that kind of pop culture influence over things is like, now people come to it and those are the characters the way that they see them. Like it kind of removes that responsibility or opportunity from you as a reader to view the characters as who you see them as in your mind.
That's how my kids are with Harry Potter. They were too young to appreciate the books. And now they're like, they don't care to read the books because they love the movies in and of themselves. So
I think I've talked about this before. That's the reason I didn't really watch Outlander, the streaming series, because I watched 2 seasons of it and I was like, this isn't who I think they are in my head. So I need them, and I still want them to be who they are in my head. Like, and I wish I could compartmentalize a little bit better, like you were talking about earlier, where you can think of like TV Jamie versus book Jamie.
I almost feel like I can do that for movies, but not TV shows. Is it because of the length in which you sit with the characters? Like movies, it's easy. If it's at least with the Emily Henry thing, right? It's a one-off movie. It's not a series. But like with something like Twilight or Harry Potter, you see them over and over and over again. And so they're stuck in your head. Also, thinking about like imagining characters in your head, I did see a funny TikTok the other day that was like, when the male love interest, it says that he has blonde hair and blue eyes. Like, no, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. Not in my head.
So like, I had a friend who is a writer and we were in a different group chat, not the Heated Rivalry chat.
So many group chats, Janette.
Okay, listen.
I'm getting a little jealous.
FOMO.
So in a different group chat, like she was talking about, she's like, do people really have a thing against blonde protagonists for the male main character? And I was like, it's a stereotype for a reason. I think a lot of people do prefer other hair colors. And I don't really know where that started or why. So if you're listening and you know the answer, please let me know, because that's a mystery to me.
Okay, you've convinced me. I'm getting my PhD in romance fiction, and I'm going to study like preferences of different hair color
Honestly,
and
please
eye
do.
type.
You and me both. Let's do a joint application. We'll go get our PhDs. We'll study reader behavior, preferences, romance.
If there was ever a time where this would be culturally relevant, it is now.
It is,
True,
yes.
very true. So in the same group chat, there was also another question that came up that I wanted to ask you guys. Do you think it's possible that some books only work for you as audiobooks?
I have never had that happen because I have never listened to an audiobook where I did not also read the book.
I find that for this situation, nonfiction, I almost always enjoy the audio over the print just because my brain. My second part is, yes, the romance book is better when the narrator has an Irish accent.
Always Irish?
Or Scottish.
Scottish, Irish. So there was a friend of mine who commented that she had tried to read a book like 2 or 3 times and just couldn't get into it. She got the audiobook version and she's like, oh my gosh, this is so great. It was the best story. But a lot of the feedback she gave was about the narrator. And so I asked her, I said, do you think that it's because they're performing it? Like there's a different element to this. Like someone's not just they're reading and then he walked into the night and then, but you know, I mean, they're performing, they're doing the inflection, you get the intonation. It's just, there's not a visual performance, but it is an audio performance, which I think does trigger something in your brain that's different than if I have to imagine all of that myself.
The said Irish character was from Good Spirits. I will out myself now.
Did you like that?
I enjoyed it, yeah. But I read B.K. Borson's other one, First Time Caller. Loved that
one. Yep.
Oh, I gave it 5 stars. But like, I did appreciate how that narrator, like the female main character is constantly like eating cookies or like has a candy cane in her mouth. Right. And so the reader would like talk like they had candy in their mouth. And it made it really entertaining. Like it made it feel like you have the TV on in the background. You know what I mean? Like,
which I think is what it's supposed to be like. So I need to go back for a second though, because I don't know if our listeners understand what it means when Ola says she gives something 5 stars. Because this girl gives out 5-star ratings like they are like Olympic medals.
I do hoard my stars. And it's nothing to the, like, I do feel bad. I almost wish like my Goodreads ratings were private because I'm like, I don't want to offend the author ever. They are purely for myself because I am certainly one of those readers where I'll be like, I love that book. And someone's like, oh, what happened in it? And I'll be like, no idea. Can't remember. As soon as I shut the book, out of my mind.
Let's go through. How many 5-star ratings did you give last year? Like I gave 32. I gave 32 5-star ratings out of 150 books.
So I had 2 5-star reads in 2025.
Suffice it to say, it is more than both of you because I give out 5-star ratings like candy.
Do you rate on vibes?
I do. If I feel happy when I finish reading it, it gets 5 stars for me. The lowest I usually give is 3-star, and that's if it's really bad. Because most of the time I'm like, I enjoyed reading this. It wasn't a waste of my time. So they get 4 stars.
I would say to me, a 3-star book is a good book. I would recommend it to someone, but it's not great. 3 is average.
3 is an Ola rating. I liked it. 4 is I really liked it. And 5 is I loved it.
Okay, my average rating for 2025 was 4.3.
Leah loves all the books.
I love this for you, though.
There's something for everyone, and apparently all of them are for Leah. Anyway, all right. Well, I suppose we should get into this episode. We're joined by 2 amazing guests who are here to share their expertise on literacy and creating a culture of reading in your school. First up, all the way from Denmark, is Pernille Ripp. Hi, Pernille.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us. And a little bit closer to home, but not too close, is Dr. Sarah Sansbury, who's joining us from Georgia. Hi, Sarah.
Hey.
Thanks so much again for being here. I'm going to go ahead and just ask you both, if you don't mind, giving us a little bit of background about yourselves and how you ended up in your current role.
I think the doctor should start because that's always way more impressive.
All right, Sarah, that's you. You're up.
So I started off as an English teacher. I've taught 6th through 12th grade. I taught English for over 10 years. And I really wanted to be able to have a stronger influence over what I was doing. So when the librarian position opened up in my school, I jumped on it. You know, we have the biggest classroom in the entire school. You know, I get to be able to be the teacher, librarian for all the students. So that's kind of where I'm at. I've had experience as a school librarian at the middle school level, but currently I'm at the elementaries right now. What's interesting to me, I taught English 6th through 12th, right? I'm certified in reading for 4 through 8, but now I've been longer an elementary school librarian in the middle. And I have 3-year-olds that I have library with all the way to 5th grade. And it blows my mind because I'm just getting them right in the beginning of their stage. You know, it's so special to be part of that reading journey.
It really is like the early learners, like you really are aware of how you're shaping and molding them, right?
Yeah. Lots of time to turn them into lifelong readers.
Very cool. How about you, Pernille? I'd love to hear more about you.
Yeah, coming to you from the Kingdom of Denmark, which may have been in the news lately over there in America. I was born and raised in Denmark, but actually spent most of my formative years, my adult years in Wisconsin. Go Cheeseheads. And just 3 years ago, ended up moving back to Denmark with my American husband and 4 Danish-American children to try to experience teaching and living in my home country. It was a really hard decision. I loved all of the educational experiences and people that we have over in America, where I was both an elementary teacher and then also a middle school English teacher for a long time, got to write some books and do some blogs and travel all around, but ended up back here in Denmark in the city I was born in, but where I did not grow up. now teaching third grade, which like if you had told me I was going to be, well, I started with these kids as in a first grade classroom, right? That I was going to go all the way down to first, I would have been like, you are insane. I don't know what to do with first graders. But it turns out they're just as much fun as middle schoolers. And so right now I am in a Danish classroom teaching Danish, which is like teaching English.
Wow.
And a part of, just building a reading culture and dabbling in the Danish reading community while also still kind of navigating the global reading conversations that are happening. And then I founded the Global Read Aloud too, a long time ago, 2010. And so I'm still doing that too. But yeah, just kind of marveling at the fact that I get to be around these kids who are now third graders and having several years of their journey into reading and cracking the reading code, but also like starting their reading identities and molding and shaping it alongside them. And it's so fascinating. And I love how life just puts you in these corners of the world. And you have to all of a sudden become really good at something you thought you were okay at. And then you realize your own shortcomings. It's so much fun. So super thrilled to be here, knowing nothing, basically, about anything.
You know everything about all the things, actually. So before we really dive into our conversation today, we like to kind of kick things off with an icebreaker just to get everybody talking a little bit. And so we're going to ask you the most hard-hitting question of the entire episode. What kind of reader are you? So do you prefer to read physical books? Do you prefer to listen to audiobooks, or do you prefer something on your e-reader?
I am definitely an audiobook person. I joke that I read stories to kids all day and I want someone to read to me, by the end of the day. But really, I'll be honest, sometimes my eyes are just tired at the end of the day. And I love being able to have an audiobook when I'm doing something mundane, like cooking or folding clothes. And it just makes these activities much more fun. And I think this is an interesting thing about myself. I like to read multiple books at once. I really feel like it's kind of like, I think of it as someone who, people who use Netflix, what mood am I in?
Right.
Do I want to read something more serious? Do I want a romance to see,
I can't do that. I feel like I'm cheating on one book with the other book. I don't know why I feel like that, but I am definitely a one book kind of reader.
Well, I love what one student told me about the reading multiple books, because before then I was like, that, no, that doesn't work. And she was like, whenever I get bored in one book, I jump to another book and then I forget that the other book was boring. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. You're jumping between. And so you're always highly motivated to jump back into your book.
That is very true. That's a great point.
I love to read more than one book at the same time. Well, I used to. I used to have one at different places in the house, so I wouldn't have to carry it around with me. But now I've switched to ebooks, and my phone pretty much just lives with me, so I'm always in the same book. I might have to go back to that.
Anyway, how about you, Pernille?
I mean, I have an aspirational answer, right? And then I have the true answer. I wish I were an audiobook person. I love downloading audiobooks, but I fall asleep, whether I'm driving or whether I'm doing anything. And also, my husband accuses me of having a slight ADHD. So he's like, it doesn't work for you because you get distracted. And so I have been working a lot on my distractibility. And if I'm cooking, I'm trying to just be in the cooking. And if I'm gardening, then I'm just in the gardening. So I love physical books, and I love also ebooks. And so I'm so appreciative, especially sitting over here in Denmark. Books are really expensive. I was just looking at some children's books and I was like, sorry, kids, I'm not going to be funding your classroom library because I don't have $30 for every book. But I have books all over my house. I do tend to read different books at the same time, but it's not on purpose. It's more because I get distracted. And then I start a new book. But I'm very much like Sarah said that, having books everywhere. I have a book on my phone. I get to commute via train every morning, which is brilliant. And so I read every morning. I read every night. But what I love too is that I think it changes. It changes on your needs. I know when I'm flying, in a couple weeks, we'll be headed to America to visit our home and our family. And I'll have a physical book with me because there's something comforting in being able to pull it out of my bag and having a book and ignoring that I'm on a plane and that there's all this noise around me. But yeah, good question.
I'm thinking about we're librarians, so we talk a lot about the smell of books and the smell of the library and the experience. And that is part of it. And someone asked me if there's anything disappointing about ebooks. And I was like, well, I could list a lot of things about the digital experience, right?
Yes.
But Probably the thing I do miss the most is like the physical weight of holding the book. And there was a book I read last year that I think I even maybe said it on the podcast. I was like, I needed to hold it. It was like a horror story. And so I was like, I felt like I just needed to touch it. And that was kind of, okay, I'm making it weird again. But
no, like sometimes you have a book that you're reading and you're like, I need to throw this book across the room and I can't because it's my phone.
Right? Or like Joey Tribbiani style, put it in the freezer. Like sometimes the book, you don't like where it's going and you're like, I got to stop right now. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started about talking about reading culture. And like, that's basically the center for this episode, right? And I really am hoping you can just help our listeners better understand what we mean when we say that we're creating a culture of reading.
It's one of those things like you know it when you have it, but it's hard to define.
Yeah, I had to think about it. Like I had to do some doodling and be like, okay, how do you make this sound cohesive? Because for me, like a reading culture is this lived experience of reading being valued every single day. It's seeing reading as something that we do because not necessarily because we want to, you hope to, but it's something that we do and it's something that we breathe. And so for me, it's never going to be about the systems or the programs or the challenges or the reward system. It's going to be about creating a culture where kids can see themselves as readers, even when they don't quite believe it themselves. And adults see all kids as readers too. And so it's all about this. I mean, it's all of the work that we've done for so many years in our libraries and in our classrooms, right, of belonging. And it's not just skill, although that's a necessary component, but it's about faith and belief in yourself that in the pages of a book, whether audio or or physical, you're going to find something that's going to matter to you in some way. And that you are more than you were before because you're in this culture where reading is seen as something valuable.
It's kind of like when I try to tell my husband not to interrupt me, because when I'm reading, I am actually doing something, even though he feels like, oh, you're just reading. I can just talk to you about whatever. And I'm like, that's not, valuing it in the way that you're talking about.
So interesting. So for my research on reading culture, I interviewed 21 award-winning librarians in Georgia. They were the Library Review Specialists of the Year for their region or for the state. So that's what I define as award-winning. Anyway, I would ask him the question of, what does reading culture look like for you in your school? And so many of them, one of the first things they talked about is kids feeling seen, valued, and felt belonging in their library. And I thought that was so interesting to me because they didn't say anything about books. They didn't say anything necessarily about reading, but this idea of kids having a place where they feel safe to explore and to really be able to embrace that identity as reader, and to have this positive experience. But I will say the academic definition I'd give to it would be an environment that encourages students' intrinsic motivation to read, as well as encourages habitual engagement with reading for pleasure. And of course, we probably all know about Dr. Murga. She is amazing. If you have not read her book about reading culture, you're missing out. So if you're interested in that topic, you need to check that out. But she, along with other research around the world, like Singapore, the States, research repeatedly describes reading culture as driven by student voice and choice of reading material. And it needs to be reading material that's relevant to students and enjoyable so they can actually want to go do it, right? They see value in it.
It's so funny to me because like the thing that sticks out the most when both of you are describing a reading culture is it's like, it seems common sense. Like if you want kids to be lifelong learners, you have to instill or foster this curiosity and this love of kind of like information discovery through reading, whether that's reading for enjoyment, reading for knowledge, whatever your purpose is. And it's like, all of the things make complete sense when you're thinking about it, but it's like, how do you get there, right? That's really the challenge.
And I really love that one of the first things they said to you is that it's a safe and welcoming space, because I have talked to many, many students and adults, because now I work not only with school librarians, but with all librarians who are very intimidated by libraries and don't feel that they belong in libraries because they're not a very good reader, or they were made to feel a certain way one time when they tried to use the library. So that I think that's a huge part of it that you don't necessarily consider maybe.
But I think that that's like, we lose that so often, right? That reading culture also depends on reading identity. And who are we creating reading identities for? Because it's really easy for us to be like, oh, well, real readers do this, or as a reader, you do this. And then kids are like, well, I don't do that, so therefore I'm not a reader. And so we can walk into environments and we can feel whether there's a reading culture or not, right?
Yeah.
But you might have to do a lot of digging as to, well, why does that school not have a reading culture? Because they'll show you all their reading programs, they'll show you the data, they'll show you the book stacks, right? And yet you can feel it in the air whether there's a reading culture that's alive and well. And so often, like you asked about, like, how do you get there, right? Well, the first step is to like figure out, where are you?
Right.
Like, what is your reading culture? And it can't be based on the adults in the building, because a lot of us,
Agreed.
we want to be like, yes, of course we have. And look at our checkout numbers and look at what we're doing, right? And look at these kids carrying books around. But it's not until we get out into the nooks and the crannies and we really start to ask kids, like, do you feel like we have a reading culture? What does reading culture mean to you? Do you feel safe coming into our spaces and being a vulnerable reader? Do you feel safe in saying that you might not be a reader? And then what's going to happen to you? That's when we can start to do this kind of work.
Well, and understanding that there's different types of readers too. Like you said, like understanding who establishes that identity. Like you said, you don't want the adults to be the one who are setting the rules, but unfortunately we are generally in charge. So like we are doing that. And I think what has happened for a lot of librarians I talk to is that they're in a culture where it's reading to achieve, not necessarily, reading to learn. So how do you start that establishing your reading identity? Who's establishing it? Like, what are the impacts, I guess, environmental and internal, like to where that journey goes?
So this is where, when you're talking about reading identity, I got very irate as a parent of a very good reader when reading in third grade for him became about getting the most accelerated reader points. And I'm just like, no, because it was never about what book do I want to read? What book would I enjoy? It's what book will give me the most points? What book will put me the farthest ahead? And it turned into this huge competition and resulted in my 8-year-old reading Moby Dick and developing a lifelong fear of whales. But
as one does.
I was just like, and I get that all the time as when I was a school librarian, the kids coming in like, well, my teacher says I have to read at my level. And I'm like, well, first of all, if you're a really great reader, there's not that many books written at your level. And also, sometimes you just want to read because you want to read, not because you're trying to constantly improve.
Yeah, I had the third grader who still wanted the horse books, but was reading at such a high level that her teachers were like, you can't read those anymore. So she would come home in tears. I have to read this book for my at-home read, but I don't want to. And it was just like, what are you supposed to do with that? Like you that is an impact. That's an external impact.
You fight back, and you do it in a gentle way, because the path to broken reading culture is littered with well-meaning intentions by a lot of amazing people.
Yes, of course.
I mean,
yeah.
like a lot of our decisions, right, come from the best of intentions, and we just don't see the harm that's happening. So when you're asking, like, reading identity, who shapes that work? Well, we do, the adults, because we are the ones in charge, but we have to continually check ourselves and check our biases and check our shortcomings to recognize, who are we making space for? Who can even see themselves as readers in our space? And then we hand the conversation over to kids. And I've been doing it with my, now third graders. And it's crazy the stuff that they can come up with as far as their reading identity, because they've been invited into conversations. Now, adults are the ones that shape it, right? Like, we make the space for it. We show the importance, and we model our own messy reading lives so that they can see what real readers are like. Even when we abandon books, or even when we can't figure out things, or even when we're in a reading slump or whatever. And then we invite them into the conversations and say, so what do you think? And often kids in the beginning, if you're like, who are you as a reader? They're going to be like, I don't know. Because they've never been asked to talk about that unless they come from a home of readers. And we know, looking at the statistics that just came out once again in the US, right, that fewer and fewer families are creating rich reading lives for their families. And it's more so by circumstance rather than by choice, right? Like, living in America, we did a lot less reading than we do in Denmark. And I can tell you that.
is really sad to me, especially because there's a lot of research that points to the importance of like social and emotional development in young learners, young children in general, even before school age, right? And how reading impacts that. And then library usage, even like having that space, you become civic minded. You're part of a community. You go to a place where everyone is welcome. And there are I shouldn't say very few, there are less and less of those, at least in America, that we feel like everyone is truly welcome, or that you feel like you don't have to go there and spend money, right? Like that, there's always this obligation of I've got to buy something if I walk through the door. So like the library is not that place, or we don't want it to be that place. We want everyone to feel welcome. We want everybody to feel like there's something there for them.
As an English teacher, I remember telling a kid, this was to do with writing, not reading, but they're intertwined, but he wrote something and I was like, wow, this is really good. Has anybody told you you're a really good writer? And they're like, no. And I think they even told me, they're like, yeah, my teacher last year said I was terrible. And I thought, oh my gosh, and so I feel like, and that's when I first had that thought of as an identity. I was like, what kind of identities are we creating in our students? What are we telling them and what are they telling themselves? And I think it's interesting because Pernille, you were saying like, I think as adults, well, some adults, I think maybe they don't need to be in education because they don't love children, but that's a whole nother story. But I think there's a lot of well-intended, like people who are trying to develop reading culture. And I think we have this idea of what motivates people is this extrinsic stuff, like prizes, rewards, or like badges and this and that. But really, I really love the intrinsic looking at that is because there's different theories on motivation, but I really love the expectancy value theory. And kind of all boils down to, do you expect to succeed, right? In this, you're motivated to do it when you feel like you're going to be able to succeed and you see value in it. And when I think of like value, I think, is this going to be interesting to me? Is this relevant to me? Like that sort of thing. So I think you have this balance of really making sure the kids have access to really high interest, relevant reading materials, but also they need to also have that identity, that expectation, those inner positive thoughts of like, I'm going to be successful at this. So that's why you need to have that welcoming and belonging in your library as well as your classroom.
I just think what Sarah's saying is so on point. But we, in the US in particular, we have really been forced out of what best practices are when it comes to reading culture and creating meaningful reading instruction, right? We are being hurried through store-bought curriculums that we have been told are going to increase our test scores. And what we're asked to cut is independent reading. It's terrible book choices, figuring out that this was a horrible book for you and you should really go back. And we're constantly doing these shortcuts in this sense of urgency, like so that they can find the right book and finally practice those reading strategies. And we're forgetting all about the messy part of reading identity, the going into a space such as a school library. And first of all, being greeted by a school librarian, because how many places aren't they getting cut,
Right.
But being greeted by a school librarian that says, go ahead and browse, look around, pick up a book. Is this going to work for you? And if not, why not? And if it is, why do you think so? And then even if you're wrong, then come back and find more. We're hurrying kids through the library. We're hurrying them through the classroom. Text creations, we're only saying you can only select so many. These are the pre-selected choices I have for you. And then we wonder when kids leave our spaces, why they can't stand in Barnes & Noble or in a public library, or even their own living room and find a book that will suit their needs. Because we're just rushing them through all of the truly like intensive reading identity creation steps. Because I can give you a blueprint on how to be a reader, but it's going to be based on me and hopefully also some research, but that's not the way to be a reader for everybody. And so I think all of the fights that are happening for the protection of classroom libraries and school librarians, but also curriculum that doesn't rush us, are so worth the time that's being placed into it, right? Because we're rushing kids through all of these really formative reading experiences that we should be savoring, and we should be holding up and saying, why did you abandon 37 books before you found this book, And what led you to have the tenacity to keep going back and trying instead of seeing them as a failed reader?
Yeah, I love that. It's one of my favorite questions to ask when a kid, they're borrowing a book. Like, I love getting their minds like, why did you pick this book? Like, what in particular, like, draw it to you? And that it's very interesting to hear what the different people say different things. And I always tell them, like, yes, judge a book by cover. I judge my books by the cover all the time. That tells you what to do. Or I think it's really interesting in Reader's Advisory when we're trying to connect a kid with a book. I'll be like, what's the last book you like to read? And then if they give me a face, I'm like, okay, what's the last book you least hated? Because some people are like, oh, well, you like that author, you'll do that. Or you like that genre. But if you kind of dive into deeper, we're like, oh, that was a novel some verse. Maybe you like that, that type of style. Or it has different perspectives. Like there's different perspectives in every other chapter. Does it make sense? Maybe you really like that. Or maybe the first person narrative. Or so really kind of like diving into more deep and then them having better understanding and having those conversations. I think kids love like being able to express their opinions and being able to, I think it makes them feel special. And that's how you develop that identity.
And it makes them feel seen, right? You're giving them vocabulary to start understanding what they need to look for in their own reading experiences. And another thing that you already alluded to, Sarah, too, is, what do you have space for? What do you have capacity for right now? We often say, what are you in the mood for? And they're like, oh, a humor book. And it's like, no. Like, how's your life right now? Do you have time to sit and read Moby Dick in third grade? Is that where we're headed? Or, are you like Dog Man for the win because my life is burning around me? Or and I think that's another part of identity too, right? Is recognizing that right now, the only emotional capacity I have is for a graphic novel that's going to make me forget about my world. Or, man, I have the bandwidth to take on, a book like Skin by E.B. Zoiboy and really think about the implications of all of the things that she brings into that book, right? Like, I think we're feeding children pieces of their identity that they didn't even consider in this way. And they can dust off. And we're starting to help them write their own biography of who they are as a reader by handing them the vocabulary. And it goes beyond like, oh, do you want a big book or a little book? Do you want a fun book or do you want a sad book? No, like where are you? And when kids abandon books, asking them, where in the book did you abandon it? When did you choose to abandon it? Was it page 1? Okay, why? Or was it page 187? Okay, why? And them going, I guess I didn't think about that, right?
Yes, like I run across those questions to like myself as an adult reader even. Still, like a book does not appeal to me and why doesn't it? Like everyone else loves this book. Like, in those situations where everyone's reading something, you're like, I don't want to read that and I don't know why. Like, but if you have never learned to ask yourself those questions or to realize that that's something that's happening, like, then you don't recognize that that's really what's getting in the way. Like there's just something about the book that doesn't appeal to you, but what is it? And discovering that is part of that experience. Going back to something that I think you both kind of touched on earlier, like adults shaping all of this. Do you feel like our reluctance to let kids see our messiness is part of what is causing this to derail a little bit? Like we want everyone to believe that we've got it all together. And like, I have no problem admitting to someone, I can't decide what to read right now because like there's so many distractions. You don't know where to look. And like the sad part of that is like, it's a calculated distraction. Like there are distractions on top of distractions. So finding something to read is extra challenging for everyone, kids, adults, doesn't matter who you are. I just wonder what your thoughts are on like how adults can make themselves more vulnerable and how librarians can encourage that within your own school community.
One of my favorite things to tell kids was when they were checking out books is like, oh, I hated that book, because I felt like it gave them permission to say like, you know what, I really hated that book too. Or, because I think it's very important for adults to share that, like, right now I'm just reading what I call brain candy because I just cannot with the world. I'm just reading something that's light. I don't want to cry. I don't want to worry. I just want to be entertained. And sometimes I would tell kids like, yep, I just hated that book. Or I always was telling them because their teachers were always recommending classics. I'm like, I hate classics. I'm like, those are like, let's find something you really love, So I think just really sharing your reading identity is a good place to start.
I think there's also in America anyway, I think in Denmark it's a little bit different, but there's an incredible just weight placed on anyone within education to be superheroes. And so a part of that is this perfection narrative that really burns us out. Like we're not allowed to post certain things on social media. Like we live very highly edited experiences because we are allowed to be with children. And I think that all of a sudden you really start to question, what am I allowed to share with my community? Because will me saying as an English teacher or as a librarian that I haven't actually read a book in 3 weeks because I can't right now, right? Will that make me seem disingenuous or less than, or I haven't even cracked the reading code for myself, so how dare I stand here and try to teach children and influence children? I think there's an incredible pressure, particularly in America, and educational, just, I don't know, the way that it's placed on us. And I mean, I knew it living there. I knew it teaching there. I felt it every single day. But it wasn't until I really stood in Denmark in a classroom and went, wow, why do I feel so much lighter? And it was because that wasn't there. Like here in Denmark, I'm allowed to be fully human. And so it's a lot easier for me to be like, oh no, I haven't been reading because I've been watching this show on Netflix or whatever. So I do think that it's something that we need to do, but it feels like so many other things, we have to do it like quietly within our own spaces, so that the people in power don't find out that we're actually not like doing all the things that we should be doing as readers.
I am actually human.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm actually human. Like, what a crazy thing to show kids. I mean, I think about the reading rules, and I've written about this extensively too and spoken about it, but just like the reading rules that we put on children that we would never follow as adults, you know? And again, a lot of it is like through our best intentions, but it's like it does not model adult reading lives. And obviously, like some of the stuff that we do with kids needs to be training in order to get to an adult reading life. But yeah, like I would never do a book recommendation after I read a book every single time, or, you know, always force myself to read 50 pages before I abandon a book, or like you said, accelerate a reader, take a quiz. Like I can't remember details that way. I remember experiences. Like I would fail most of the accelerated reader tests I had to do, right?
I had so many conversations about AR from the standpoint of like, I understand it works for some kids. Gamifying reading works for many kids. So I will preface this with that, but I didn't understand the high pressure, kind of high stakes competitiveness of it as like driving kids to achieve. And they're like, well, it's about reading comprehension. They have to take a test that proves that they understood the book. And I was like, okay, but in real life, I don't have to do that. Like, and if you want to measure reading comprehension, why are you doing that outside of the classroom or trying to do it in this passive way?
Talk to them.
Like, yeah, why is that not more integral into your curriculum?
Yeah, do book clubs and sit and listen to their book club conversations. Right. Like, there you go. Like, did they understand it?
One of the things that I always, when I was doing reader's advisory with kids, like Sarah was talking about, like, you know, what did you like about it? And like so many times it was, well, I liked how it made me feel. And none of the store-bought reading curriculums address that at all. And it's a huge part of it.
Yeah, it's the social emotional development piece of all of this that like we keep going back to, right? Like what causes you to engage with a story to begin with? Is it empathy for the character? Are you interested in the character? Are you learning something that's new to you? Are you experiencing something for the first time in a safe way? Like there's so many aspects of reading that draw kids in and those characters, and you have to find a way to connect with them. It's why we talk about like diversification of reading materials, high quality texts, all those things that we know as librarians that you need to be looking for. But it's like, this is why representation matters in your collection. This is why there's got to be something for everyone.
I remember when I was an English teacher thinking, if all my kids got straight A's, 100s on the state finalized, you know, mandatory testing, or even to like in my classes, like they knew all what a verb is, they knew how all the reading comprehension, 100, but they left my class hating reading. I was like, I've failed them because, and I know it's not in our standards specifically stated that you need to teach kids how to love and appreciate literature, but to be able to actually want to independently read on their own because they love it and they enjoy it is just so powerful. And speaking of AR, like not all books, you know, have an AR quiz, you know, are we limiting them to what they read, that sort of thing? And like, yes, maybe they get all those points in the gamifying, but like, do they actually want to pick up a book and read on their own outside of that? You know, just creating this love for reading and getting kids to independently read on their own, habitual reading, that's really where you see the big impact. Like the kids who are strong, independent readers, that's where you see them at those really big academic success, all these things that we're wanting to have, right? They want to have strong literacy levels and things like that.
Well, and I think like what Sarah is saying, right? Like these artificial worlds that we're constructing around kids are diluting the point of reading, which is to want to explore the world and see reading as something valuable on your own, right? And I think also like in the spaces that we're creating, so the reading cultures that we're creating, we're forgetting to acknowledge that when kids are reading, they're actively combating a world of distraction and just how much brain power that takes. And the thing is, we then look at the kids like there's something wrong with them, but that world of distraction is created by adults. We're the ones that have given our children phones. We're the ones that have brought computers into schools. We're the ones that have brought literacy programs. And honestly, we're the ones voting people into office too, right? Like we are constantly looking at kids as if they're the ones that are the lost generation. They are the lost readers. They are the ones that are not doing the things that we wish they were while we're not doing it ourselves. And in the meantime, also in our wake are leaving all these distractions. And so I think if we also start to look at our readers who are actually trying to read or who have the courage to continue to try to connect with a book, that will still come to the library or pick up a book during the independent reading or give it a shot. Like if we don't start celebrating them and recognizing just how much mental effort is being placed into simply picking up a book, then we're going to lose readers even more, because it's like we're walking around lamenting that, oh, kids aren't readers these days, and then not recognizing, well, yeah, it's the world that we've created that they're not reading in.
One of the things I hear, because I work with a lot of school administrators, and like when I'm hearing that a school is closing their library, the superintendent will say to me, well, kids just don't read anymore. And I'm like, that is unacceptable. And what are you doing to fix it? Closing the library is not going to fix it. I mean, we don't get to, as adults, say, well, they just don't read anymore. That's too bad. You know, that's a failing on their part. And therefore, I can save some money on my school library. We have to make them readers.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to this idea of like your identity and what does being a reader mean? Like I had this conversation, I don't mean to bring my husband up so many times in this episode. I literally never talk about him, but you know, he has always said like he doesn't see himself as a reader. He's like, I'm not a reader. And I read a lot. So he's always like, are we even going to get along like in the early days, because you like to read and I am not a book person. But like finally just figuring out he doesn't like to read fiction. He reads tons of nonfiction. Like he's not going to sit down with someone's memoir unless it's someone he's really interested in. But he reads a ton of material for work. He reads a ton of material. He's very into sports. So like he's on every sports blog, sports magazine, sports. I'm like, there are different kinds of readers. I'm like, you do read for information. You just don't really identify that way. And he was like, what? Like,
you are a reader.
Yeah, you have to really stop limiting kids to like, oh, you only reading for like fiction is real reading. And it's like, there's no one type of reading that's real reading.
Graphic novels are books.
Exactly. I know. I remember I've had so many teachers tell me, oh, I'm not a reader. I don't read. Oh, it's so bad. I'm so ashamed. Speaking of that earlier about that messiness. And then come to find out, like, they're reading ESPN.com or this and that. And I was like, you are a reader. You're just not like what we think of the stereotype of what a reader has to be. I know you've seen those things where people have outside the doors of teachers' rooms where it says so-and-so is reading this right now. I started putting up like magazines, magazine covers, you know what I mean? Like a picture of a magazine cover, right, or ESPN.com, or, like, we just need to really maybe like change the way we see reading and to celebrate all the readings.
Right. Well, and change the conditions of how you get to see yourself as a reader. We have to teach kids that there's different formats of reading that count, that you may be, you're doing a ton of reading on your phone, or you're doing a ton of reading in magazines. And then also we need to train sustained reading, right? In a different type of environment. And that's all it is. It's just a different type of reading, but you already have the skills. And I think something one of you was, you were saying, we need to make readers. But the thing is, we can't make anyone a reader, but we can create conditions where they might want to be. And that's where the fight starts, right? And that starts with the heart of the school, which is the school library. Our school library tells us how the reading culture is doing in a school. And if there is no school library or there's no school librarian, well, then you've already cut off the artery, right? So
that's a great point. I want to circle back for a second just to talk about the actual like physical spaces that we read in for a second. And, we talk about creating this warm and welcoming environment where we all feel safe to be whatever kind of reader we want to be. But what does that look like? Like, where do you begin with creating a warm and welcoming space for people to come into where they feel like they can be vulnerable and be free to choose?
So I interviewed all those award-winning librarians, and what I really thought was interesting is I took what they all said and I tried to find like common threads, like what did they all have in common that they're doing really well, and then combining that with what research is saying around the world. So speaking of reading looking different, a lot of times we think of it individual by themselves, but there's a lot of reading as a social thing. And they talked about was making it be welcoming is that you have different zones in your library, a place where you can individually read as well as there's some social things, like even just the way you are placing your furniture for that. Are you encouraging that? Of course, you could do like soft seating and things like that to encourage them to stay. But when they walk through that door, what is the first thing they see and what is the first thing they hear? What is the first thing they feel? And you really can create a bridge or you can create a wall. And there's so many times in our lives that we as librarians are so busy, maybe we're device coordinator too, and we're busy doing this and that. It's crazy, we're stressed out, but we have to slow down and remember what we are doing right there. We're creating connections. I remember talking to this one librarian, and she was complaining about, oh, if I have to tell a kid one more time where Dogman is, I'm going to lose my mind, or where the dinosaurs are. And I thought, you know what, you've been saying all day long, maybe for weeks, this is where this is, this is where this is. But this might be the first time this kid is asking you this. And if you just like, oh, they're over there. Oh, there's a sign. Don't you see it? What are you telling that kid? You're not welcome here. They're developing this negative relationship with the reading, right? This memory. Just these are really small things, but I think that is where really begins with that welcoming.
Yeah, I would agree. I've asked my students for years, just like, how would we change our environment? And I still think of Isabel, who said it's not how it looks, it's how it feels. Because really, you can create a reading space with just 3 good books and a place to stretch, right? But whoever is welcoming kids into that space is going to set the tone. I've worked with incredible school librarians who have just blown my mind away. And I've always also worked with one librarian where I was like, I don't think she likes children. And I'm glad I didn't have to work with her for a very long time. But it's like, that library didn't feel welcoming, even though it had all of the components that we would say a welcoming library would have. But, and so I think we start with also asking the kids of like, what are the types of spaces that you would like to have access to? And how would you like to be able to read? And I'm even talking physically. Can they walk around with the book, right? Can they lay down? Can they get out of their desk? Can they stand up? Can they sit next to a trusted friend, etc.? And so much of it is exactly what Sarah is saying. It's the feel of the space. And then, of course, there's all the extra stuff that's amazing. But if the feel isn't there, then it doesn't matter how much money we put into a renovation, right?
Yeah, I've been at places where I took over this one library and the kids were afraid to touch the books because they didn't want to mess it up, the shelves. I thought, oh my God, that's terrible. I was like, messy shelves indicate, yes, you're trying to teach kids how to take care of things and, straighten up. But I was like, messy shelves are indications that like the library is actually being used, right? Or you see a book on display, they're like, can I get that one? Yes. And I used to joke, I'm like, trying to quote from Lion King, some kids got it someday. I was like, every book that the light touches, you have access to, that sort of thing. But just, what are we saying? And then you go on to like, what kind of books are they seeing on display? I started at this one school where we were at fire drill, and I was counting how many blonde heads we had. Most of the kids there were Latino. Spanish was their first language. And I started going through the books, and I was like, every cover had a white person on it, or blonde hair, blue eyes. And I thought, this is not going to work, right? And I was like, what are we telling these kids? If you want them to feel welcome, they need to see themselves, and you need to have books that show that about the things that they really care about. And that part of that's like, you really need to get to know your community and get to know your students. But having a welcoming place is a game changer, because that is before they even open a book, you are establishing trust in a relationship, and a place where it's okay to fail or not like a book.
Yeah, like you want them to have respect for the space because like we should all respect, any space that we move through or walk into. But at the same time, it's like you don't want to treat them as a guest in their own space, because they need to have a little bit of ownership over that.
Exactly. It is not my library. It is our library. It's not, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like really watching
I
your
love
words.
that, yeah.
That drives me crazy when people are like, I was librarian like, hey, don't mess up my books. I was like, whoa, these are not your books. These are our books. The school, you do not own this. Like literally, you do not pay for these books. I need you to like expand your thoughts here.
So we had the pleasure of having Pernille as a guest speaker at the Illinois School Library Workers Symposium last fall. And one of the things from your speech or your presentation that kind of stuck with a lot of us was your discussion of book shopping. And we've talked about this a little bit, but like I want to talk a little bit more about this. If you can tell our listeners what this means with regard to like learners and readers advisory and like how we should be advising kids to shop for their own books.
My main points that I've been talking lately, the last couple of years about book shopping are the conversations that are waiting to happen during book shopping that so often we kind of drop kids off at the library and then, then it's like, okay, good luck. And then we kind of go around and we have like little conversations and, oh, you found a book and stuff like that. But this is the time to really start talking about reading identity and diving into what pieces of their reading identity do they have. And so recognizing that when you're standing next to a child, have them really talk through what their process is. Have them talk through why they're browsing the way they are. Are they just meandering because they don't know a way in? Are they, what are their habits when they come into a book-filled space? And so for me, it once again dives into our reading culture, right? Like who runs into your book-rich space, your library or whatever classroom collection, and who kind of holds back, and what does that tell you about where they're at in their reading identity? And then also sneaking in some of those questions, like when was the last time you read something that you really loved? Have you ever had a joyous reading experience? Who are you picking that book up for? Are you picking it up for your teacher, or are you picking it up for you? What are you missing on the shelves? Like I see you kind of browsing, but what is it you're not finding? And so I think for me, the bottom line of book shopping culture is just that we forget to see it as this incredible field experience where we can really have a lot of conversations with our students about the very act of reading and themselves as readers, not only to shape our understanding of who they are, but also to start to see gaps in our reading culture. And we can start to see patterns that we can then use to shape our reading culture.
I just love it as a concept for thinking about like book selection in a different way.
I feel like if kids are not like innate born readers and they do get dropped off at the library like that, and they're like go find a book. Like that's the order. You have to come out with a book, I think making it like even the term book shopping is less intimidating.
Yes.
I can shop. Yes. I know how to shop. I've shopped before. So
yeah.
And it's supposed to be social. That's it too. Like, right. I love how like about 15 years ago, we started to see a real transformation in library spaces where people were like, we don't want the we actually want the talking. Mm-hmm. And how do we talk in a big space so everybody can be here? But like also like notice, are they actually sharing recommendations with each other? Or are they just talking about the football game or whatever's going on? Are they having reading conversations within the space? And then also like, who are you speaking to? Are you only going towards your vulnerable readers, so the kids that are like, you almost have to drag over the book stacks? And then you're also going to your kids who are like, I have 13 books and I think I'll read them all before next week, right? What about the kids in the cracks, the kids in between, like the kids that love to hide? Like, are we having conversations with them too?
I always went in my library, there was like a blind corner. And so like, I always went there first because those are the kids that want to hide because they don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation. And they've been trained that like when I come in, I had a librarian before I took that job that was like, don't touch my books, and it was terrible. And I had to do a lot of retraining, but I would always go to that blind corner and be like, hey guys, what are we talking about? What books? And it took a while, but they began to trust. And that's the other thing. I'm like, I would always explain to administrators, I'm like, this is not a quiet library. We are engaged. We are talking about reading. And that's why whenever you walk by, there's a loud noise. So
right.
I remember as an English teacher, this one kid, he was sitting in the front row and he had this big fat book with like yellow pages. They were so old. And I'm like looking at it and I'm looking at the cover and I'm like, that is not something I would want to read. I don't think a 7th grade boy would want to read this book. And I'm like, so why'd you pick that book? He's like, I don't know. I just grabbed it. And like, like these conversations I have, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, whoa. And it just changed my worldview of like things like that. And then I started thinking more. I've taught a lot of schools where there's ESOL students. They speak English as a second language or other language. And, we love books. We love reading, right? We walk into the library and there's like 15,000 books. We're like, look at all the opportunities. It's so exciting. But there's these kids who walk in there are like, oh my God, I am so overwhelmed right now. And I think that as a librarian that's what I'm saying. Really, when you walk in, what do you see? And, signage is important and things like that. And I remember this one place I had, and I watched the pattern of kids, like where they walked. They would always come in, they take a left and kind of do like a big circle. And guess what was right on the left? It was a bunch of old encyclopedia books, like literally with dust on top, right? And I was like, okay, these got to go, right? And I made up my sports section. I put my fiction sports and my nonfiction sports there and my sports magazines. And then a place that looked comfy to sit and read. And it changed things so much. And other things I think is really helpful, like this shopping mentality, is I literally would get those magazines out where you can purchase books, your book catalogs. And I would have kids look through there. And especially my reluctant readers or the people I know, because I would ask teachers, I'm like, who's struggling? And I would say, hey, will you help me pick out some books? One, they were so proud, that reading identity. And they're going to want to read it because they picked it out. And then they're going to recommend it to their friends. And it's just like this snowball effect of positivity. So that student involvement is so key to that reading culture. Yes, we are shaping it, but the students, their ownership, that's when you're golden. That's when you're having a really good reading culture.
Yeah, they're breathing life into it.
Yeah, they're active participants in their own reading. And that's the thing is like you're not telling them to do something, you're not forcing them into something. They have an active role and they have ownership of it. And I think that's a big part of them learning how to do any of this and taking those skills into adulthood. That carries over into other areas of your life, which I think people also kind of short sell the importance of learning these types of skills in the library, right? It's a safe space for you to do this and be who you are and kind of get to know yourself and then take that into other areas of your life. How would you advise librarians, or what advice would you have for librarians to help them learn or feel more comfortable giving kids that freedom?
Just try. I think we're so afraid.
Yes.
We're so afraid. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? It's not like you're handing them gasoline and a bunch of matches. Yeah. Give them a catalog, double check their choices so that you're not getting like crazy YA selections in the elementary. You know what I mean? But
right.
Figure out where your own onus of control is okay to let go, and then just start small and layer it in.
There's so many things, like some of the best books cut from student recommendations. Like it was like a bunch of ones that was like music about musicians and artists. I had no idea who these people are. I'm gonna say I'm not cool. I don't know. So that was really helpful. The other thing I think is really listening to these conversations the kids are having when you're talking about trying to find a book. I see you're struggling. What you said, Pernille, like what's not there? What do you wish to see? And I have usually I have my phone on me, right? Or I have my smartwatch, and I'll make a note. I'll be like, buy more Lilo and Stitch books and then I try to get the kid's name and their homeroom teacher. And something I've done, and it's these little things that make such a big difference. And I've had kids come from me later down in life, and even parents saying, you have no idea what this did to my child, how positively affected them. But I'll write down their name and their homeroom. And when that book comes in, I find it. And I bring it to them. And I'm like, hey, I know you were really wanting this Lilo Stitch book. I want you, if you want to be the first person to read it. And they're like, what? And they just feel so special. Does that make sense? Like it's these little things I think you're really paying attention to. And I know these are small things, but these are the small things that grow into big things. Like they are now going to be telling their friends to come to the library. And I think we think it has to be this grandiose, big literacy program and these huge reading reward parties, but really what I heard from the award-winning librarians I interviewed and what I've experienced in my own life is that it's just these little things. And not to be afraid. Like even genrifying, what's the worst? You put the book in the wrong genre spot, or I've had kids, I've let them, and this is really good too, if you want to get some of the reluctant readers or the kids that are struggling. I had a space in the library where they created their own book display. Was it the most amazing Pinterest-worthy book display? No. Were there maybe some misspellings on their thing? Probably, but that's okay. They were so proud of it. And again, they're bringing in their friends. Look what I did.
And what I love about this conversation that we're having is that it is relatively simple to begin the process of creating a reading culture. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to have a certification. You don't even necessarily have to have permission from anybody.
I was just going to say, you don't have to ask permission, and you don't need to know what you're doing either. Life is so much more fun when we don't.
It's hard to remember that. It's so hard. And I think we've already kind of talked about, and I say this all the time, adults really do ruin everything. But
we do.
Because we are overthinkers and we're trying to always do the best and be the best. But I think you're all making the same point, right? It's it's simple and you have to start small. And a lot of times we do have this idea that it needs to be this huge, big, successful thing. And so it's over before it started because we already have decided we can't achieve that tomorrow. So we're just gonna not even start.
But that's part of it too. We have to adjust our own measures of success, right?
Agreed.
Success is a kid reading 10 more pages than they did before. Success is a kid actually coming into the space and maybe staying 5 minutes longer than they did before and then coming back. The other thing I would say with Sarah's ideas too is create a library advisory board with your students and not just the kids that love to read. Go snag a couple of kids that are I see you hate the library. Come with me. I need you. And then bribe them with stuff. Yeah. But I think also stop being so afraid of your own good ideas. I created the Global Read Aloud on a whim in 2010. And if I had known that the Global Read Aloud would still be going in 2026, would have connected, I don't even know how many millions of kids, I would have never done it because I would have thought that I was the wrong person to do it, because who was I to create a program like that? And so instead of going, maybe it's not me, I'm not right, or maybe I'm new in this position, or I've been here 40 years and it's not time for change, or, whatever, just do it. And then if it sucks, don't tell anyone. Just be I tried it, it didn't work, but I'm going to try this next thing. And then pat yourself on the back. I tried something new, it failed. Oh my gosh, how lucky am I that it failed? Because that's the other thing. We forget that school should be about failing. I know we do the acronyms and the first whatever attempt at learning or whatever. Nobody believes it. We just hang it up on our walls and hope the kids believe it, but we don't. So give ourselves the same conditions to fail as we want to provide our fictitious students, right? And all of the kids we actually teach, and then be proud of every little thing and ask the kids if they can feel a difference. And also ask the kids, what changes would you like to see?
Yeah, I remember even just conversations with different students, you can be disappointed something didn't work out, but what did you learn from it? And what will you change and do differently the next time? Because there's value in that. And I don't think that we give ourselves the grace or the space to be those types of learners as adults. We have to do it perfectly. We have to do, and librarians, I feel are very guilty of this. And I don't know what it is about this profession that maybe we're just a lot of people pleasers, high achievers, perfectionists. What are we as a profession, right? That makes us kind of predisposed to this. But we want everything to be great for everyone. And we feel if we do something and it didn't work out, that's bad. And it's really not bad. It's okay.
But that's the American education culture. And I'm telling you that as a teacher in Denmark now. We are forced to be perfect in America. And if you are less than perfect in any way, then there's something wrong with you. And we'll make sure we get it in our framework of evaluation. And it is a cult. And they sell us things. I mean, think about it. How many of us have been sold programs of trying to just not burn out in school because we have been taught that we are imperfect and therefore we should be working at all times in order to be perfect. And so we are also just products of the conditions that we are placed in America. And so it is really hard to fail because you feel your job is on the line.
100%. Totally agree with that. Yeah. And I've heard many people say that until you step outside that type of social pressure, you don't understand that you actually have it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Moving over here and not having that, like not have, of course, like they want us to do, like they want us to achieve and they want kids to be able to read and have it. But there's no, like, nobody looks at me like I'm supposed to have all the answers. Nobody looks at me as if I'm supposed to be able to get it all done and to, like, move mountains with every child. They know that I am part of the puzzle and that it is a societal puzzle, and that the government also needs to create conditions for parents to be part of that puzzle, the home adults, etc. And we don't have that in America. Like, it is all placed on teachers and librarians, right? Like, and we see a child's non-progress into reading as a personal failure. We didn't work hard enough. We didn't do enough to get this kid where we wanted to, but that's, I mean, we can't survive in conditions
in
like
Denmark. I assume they do not evaluate teachers based on student achievement.
No, God, no. We don't even give grades. Like, we give grades in 7th grade. That's the first time that they get grades.
Oh,
like,
that's
and I'm
amazing.
like, we're crazy with exams and stuff.
I would love that.
No. And I mean, obviously they want us to perform, and we do have a national test that is highly debated and all of this stuff. But like I said, like, we're one piece of the puzzle. And so if a kid is not succeeding in school, sure, they're going to look at like what's happening in the classroom, but they're also going to look at what's happening in the community, what's happening at home, what resources do they not have access to, and how as a society do we owe them a better experience in order to raise them as a child.
We've talked about this at various times in this conversation about how your educational experience, that environment, is only one part of what shapes your identity as a reader, your experience as a reader. And it is also, too, I think, what makes it sad when you see things like different programs impacting kids at home, their home life, and making it harder for people to read to their children. There's more distractions at home. There's more, you can't afford to buy books because now you're buying food. Groceries are very expensive. It makes it really hard to watch those things happening in real time, knowing the lifelong impact it will have on kids growing up through this time. But I want to talk a little bit about the outcomes. How do you know when you've achieved this? Is it something you ever achieve?
I think you're on the way if your kids are having a lot of good, quick wins, is what I say. I was reading something about motivation, but people are motivated after they are successful, not beforehand. In the sense of like, you're on the way if kids are experiencing quick wins, if they are feeling successful. Things that I would see in a successful reading culture is like students recommending books to other kids, right? Showing where to find them in the library, that ownership. Kids getting excited about books and reading. Like, I don't know if you ever see a kid do like a little happy dance, like, yeah, I got this book, like physical joy, that sort of thing. Teachers are bringing their kids to the library, that sort of thing.
I remember I felt like I had succeeded when 3 kids got into a shoving match over the last copy of a book in the library. And I'm like, we cannot have fights in the library. But I'm like, has that ever happened? Have kids actually gotten in like a physical shoving match? And it was Kelly Yang. So front desk, if you want a great book recommendation for kids.
I think Sarah hits like so many of the points, right? That it's in all of these, yes, there's all these measurable moments where you kind of look up and you're like, there's a moment. And I think when you start to feel like there's so many moments you can't count them in a day, that's when you know you're thriving, and then you start to really want to protect it. I think so much of it has to do with safety, that every reader feels valued, even those who have strayed from a reading path. And so it's kind of like when we ask kids, like, does it feel safe to be a reader in this environment? And they can say, yeah, that's when we know we've achieved the ultimate goal. But until we get to that point, because that's kind of a dream in the sky, is can you be honest about your reading in this environment? Even if that is, I haven't actually read any of the books that you brought to me and said I was going to love, or whatever their answer is, right? Like, do kids feel safe enough in our space to continue attempting to be readers? I think that is a crazy good mark of a thriving reading culture. And then you have all the fun stuff, right? All of the kids recommending books and kids wanting to read even though there is no rewards or no AR or no tracking, or not because they're doing a unit or anything like that. But can you also be honest enough to say when you don't feel like a reader, and knowing that an adult will still welcome you? I think that's a pretty good indicator.
That's something I think you don't think about, like the freedom to be honest about who you are as a reader.
I used to always encourage kids to tell me, I'm like, you can tell me that you hate reading. It doesn't make a difference to whether or not you're welcome here. I reserve the right to try to change your mind, but you can still come in here and hate reading. That's who you are, and you're welcome here, you know? So,
But I think that's one of the things I love about libraries too, is that they've evolved into information spaces, and information is not just about reading, right? Like, we're
Yes.
talking about creating a reading culture, but if part of it is just feeling welcome in your school library space, like, there's other reasons to be there. Puzzles, games, you know, like, there's other things that bring
Makerspace.
kids, makerspace, yeah. 3D printing, maybe you're a coder, maybe, you know, all those things bring you together. And then maybe you do become, you know, whatever type of reader you're going to be in that space. Is there anything else either of you would like to add?
I think it's important for people to know that they're not alone. I think sometimes, depending on your school conditions, you can feel like you're the only one trying to carry the weight of a reading culture. If that's the case, right, then reaching out so that you can be anchored by other people sharing their experiences and also cheering alongside you for those small victories. I think education can be incredibly isolating, especially when we're working way too many hours and we don't have the time or the bandwidth to show up in spaces. And so knowing you're not alone, that there's a lot of people trying this, and there's a lot of people out there sharing ideas that you can also just replicate, so you don't even have to do kind of your own work, can be really freeing. And you don't have to be alone in trying to change a reading culture all by yourself.
Yeah, I think it's good to have someone you can be vulnerable with. I love being able to find your person in the building, like a teacher who maybe, especially if they're like your go-to person, you're like, hey, you want to try something crazy? And they're like, yeah, let's do it. And, you know, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But just finding that person you can talk to and be vulnerable with about how's it going, and that exchange of ideas. This went terrible and I don't know why. Can you help me with this? Or this is my first year working with 3-year-olds. I still feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm always like asking other people, I'm like, hey, do you have any inspiration or words of wisdom, any book recommendations for read alouds? And I think just being able to have that moment where you can feel like you can be vulnerable, be safe yourself.
You've got to find your people. Yep.
So I'm going to move into the last segment of the episode. We like to call this Shelf Care. This is where we really focus on mental health and wellness. So thinking about how difficult it is to work in library spaces, sometimes just in education spaces sometimes. We like to ask our guests what you personally do, if you're willing to share, to take care of yourself when you're feeling overwhelmed.
Besides eating copious amounts of chocolate.
That's a perfectly valid one.
Which is not a long-term solution.
But it is a short-term coping mechanism.
But it's wonderful. I think for me, it's twofold. One, giving myself grace. I'm really bad at that. I'm always pushing harder and trying to reach unattainable heights, which is both good and stupid. But I think finding comfort in good enough. And then I think CrossFit, which all of my friends, the fact that I'm saying that on a podcast, will laugh out loud, because I was the person that hated exercise and was like, you guys are weird. Stop exercising. Why do you like running? And then I finally realized that all of my distractions and rage at the world were not very healthy, and I needed to lift very heavy things while someone yelled at me. And I think going into something where you're constantly just in survival mode, but like in a good way. And I think is really good for me.
I'm a recent exercise convert too, so I totally get that. Yeah.
It's like, I just need to live through the next minute. I can't think about the world. Like I am about to
I need to try not to die right now. So.
Yeah, exactly. So those are my go-to. Grace and yelling and exercise and CrossFit. Yeah.
Grace and violence. Okay.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. Sarah, how about you? Anything you'd like to share?
So I love just reading, like, as you said, brain candy. So I've done a lot of academic reading and writing and whatnot. And I'm like, I am going to read the entire Fourth Wing series, and I'm going to love every minute of it. Romantasy. Let's go.
Yes.
And I love snuggling my dog while drinking coffee in the morning. Like I kind of just,
yeah.
It's kind of silly, but I just wake up and I'm like, I'm not doing anything except for drinking this coffee and sitting down and snuggling my dog. And then I will get dressed.
No, you can't undervalue the impact of dog snuggles for sure. I am a big proponent of the idea that every book you read doesn't have to save your life. So you read all the romantasy
That's a
away.
T-shirt. I need that on a T-shirt. Yeah.
But that goes back to the American competitive thing, like everybody's like, oh, I'm reading a Pulitzer Prize winner. I'm like, yeah, I'm just reading like this dorkiest romance you'll ever see or what,
I'm reading a queer retelling of Charlie the Chocolate Factory. That's what I'm reading.
Oh, that sounds amazing, actually.
It actually is really fun.
I need the title of that because that sounds amazing.
It's by Timothy Janowski. It's 1 Week to Win the Chocolate Maker, I think is what it's called. I want to ask you before we wrap up here, is there anything that you're working on that you'd like to share with the listeners or anything you'd like to promote right now?
Well, I just put in a book proposal to ALA about, I'm really excited. We'll see. I'm hoping I'll hear. But anyway, that's what I do. I'm working on a book about, so my research, one of the things that they talked about was these librarians kept on saying these same things over and over again. And I was telling my husband about it, and he's like, oh, that's the flywheel effect. And I'm like, what? And so in business, there's this thing called the flywheel effect. A flywheel is a physical wheel that's weighted. And so once it gets going, it keeps going, right? So, and it's the idea of like attracting patrons in your library, engaging them, having them experience delight, and inspiring them as readers to come back. So it's the school library flywheel.
Oh, nice. I can't wait.
Very cool. I can't wait either. I'm going to keep my eye out for that. Good luck with everything.
We'll see.
That sounds exciting.
I'm not promoting anything. Global Rela. Come join the
Global
Global
Rela.
Rela. But it's a purposeful thing because like I'm a baby teacher in Denmark, and so I'm learning stuff over here. So
I just still think it's very humbling that you refer to yourself as a baby teacher at
I
this
am a baby
stage in your
teacher.
career. After all you've accomplished, I'm like, I don't
they
think
don't
of you as a
care.
baby teacher.
Nobody knows who I am in Denmark. Like my colleagues are like, there's a crazy person from America. Like, no. Do you know what I mean? It's really humbling and it's really good, and it's also really frustrating at times because sometimes you want to be like, I do actually have some ideas, but I just do them in my classroom, and then other people are like, oh, what are you doing? And they're like, is that an American idea? And I'm like, yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a good one.
I want to thank you both again for joining us. It's been really great to talk with you and hear everything you have to share with our listeners. To all of our listeners out there, let us know if you have any questions or topic ideas you'd ever like us to cover on a future episode. As always, you can leave us a voicemail on our hotline, which is 630-734-5015. And until next time, stay legit, don't quit.